Are you guys familiar with the term crop dusting? Not the original meaning in which an airplane drops pesticides on a field, but the alternate meaning in which a person walks into a room, blasts a disgusting, tear-inducing fart, and then just keeps walking out the door, leaving the room's occupants to gag on the smell and then fight over who did it. Are you familiar with that? That is essentially what the United States Supreme Court has just done to all of America. They've crop dusted us. And honestly, it might have been more like a full-on shart. They sharted us. In just a week or two, they have dropped a series of judgments, essentially destroying the country before piecing out on a nice 3-month summer vacation. So previously, I've talked about their dismantling of Roe v. Wade, the destruction of the wall separating church and state. Today, I'm going to talk about one final decision of this session, which is the neutering of the EPA. The Environmental Protection Agency was established in 1970 by executive order by Richard Nixon, of all people, and officially approved by both houses of Congress with the express purpose of protecting the environment. They do this through fines and sanctions, carrots and sticks that help decrease or stop industries from polluting our air, our land, and our water. Shortly after they came into existence, the EPA conducted a survey called Documerica, in which they collected tens of thousands of photos of what America looked like at that time before they officially began their work. And you can see most of these photos free online at the National Archives. Things like pesticide cans discarded in fields, a river of oil pouring down a barren hillside, unhealed scars from slash and burn, an oil slick surrounding the Statue of Liberty. It goes on and on. 10 years after its establishment, the EPA was granted the authority to clean up what became known as Superfund sites, where hazardous waste was infecting the land. For instance, General Electric spent 30 years dumping hundreds of thousands of pounds of highly carcinogenic PCBs into the Hudson River, and the EPA made them remove it all in just 6 years. In the Boston area, 1.7 billion gallons of sewage used to stream into the Charles River every single year, but the EPA demanded that they upgrade their drains and their sewer systems, and that all but eliminated the problem, making the Charles River swimmable in 2013 for the first time in 60 years. There are stories like this all over the country. Rivers, lakes, and streams that residents couldn't get anywhere near for decades, now able to be fished, able for kids to swim in them, able for wildlife to return. The EPA is also the steward of the Clean Air Act, a program meant to address air pollution in the United States. How bad was it back then? Well, in 1949, smog killed 20 people in one Pennsylvania town, leaving thousands of others with severe respiratory problems and increasing that town's mortality figures for at least the next decade. Acid rain was also a common problem. Fossil fuel power plants pumped chemicals into the air that then fell back on our heads as acid. The EPA instituted a 2-part program to clean up these plants by the year 2000, and they achieved every goal they set via cap and trade, capping total emissions and trading credits. In 2021, researchers found that the acid rain program caused lasting improvements in ambient air quality and reduced mortality by 5% over 10 years, which continued to grow as time went on. In 2015, the Obama administration attempted to enact the Clean Power Plan, which would set goals for each state to reduce emissions by moving greenhouse gases to renewables. But that was put on hold by the Supreme Court at the time because several Republican-led states objected to the idea on behalf of the fossil fuel industry. That hold lasted all the way until 2019, when Trump tried to throw the CPP away because it gave the EPA too much power, arguing that they were allowed to regulate individual power plants, but not the industry as a whole. A lower court then threw out that idea, saying, the EPA was perfectly within its rights, mandated by Congress, to find the best system of emission reduction possible. As of last week, the Clean Power Plan had never gone into effect at all, and Biden had announced a plan to come up with something new to replace it. So there was no actual reason for the Supreme Court to even pick this case up. But they did, because they are alt-right theocrats hell-bent on destroying not just our country, but the entire planet. As expected, the 6 conservative justices ruled that the EPA had absolutely no right to regulate emissions with industry-wide changes, saying that if Congress wants to do that, they'll have to get together and come up with their own legislation to do it. Which they won't, because they are owned in part or in full by the fossil fuel industry. The EPA was the one agency authorized to combat that problem, and now they have no weapons to do so. In her dissent, Elena Kagan wrote that when the EPA was established and as it evolved over the years, it's been clear that Congress wanted the agency to do exactly what it has been doing, using new ideas and new tools to combat a problem that Congress itself cannot or will not do. She wrote, "The court appoints itself instead of Congress or the expert agency, the decision maker on climate policy. I cannot think of many things more frightening." One of the few good aspects of our democracy is that it makes room for politicians to understand that they're not necessarily the experts in a particular field, and they are not necessarily free from conflicts of interest. A person cannot be an expert on writing and passing legislation, as well as healthcare and assault weapons and animal welfare and libel law and carbon emissions all at the same time. Even Leonardo da Vinci, he knew a lot of stuff, but he didn't know shit about women. So a smart person and a good politician knows what they don't know, and they know to trust the experts. And in this case, while their record has been anything but stellar, Congress has generally understood that the scientists, engineers, and specialists at the Environmental Protection Agency are the experts at protecting the environment. The planet that we all live on because we have nowhere else to go. So this is, to put it mildly, a bit disappointing, particularly coming not quite a year after the latest IPCC report on climate change that found that drastic action is needed immediately to avoid turning our planet into a literal hellscape. So what do we do about all this? I don't have an answer for that. Sorry. Moving on to another topic entirely, I'm thinking of adding a little book chat to some of my videos. I just finished reading Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend you read it as well. Without getting into too many spoilers, the plot is that in the very near future, humanity realizes that they are facing the grim consequences of the past few centuries of their own actions, and drastic action is needed immediately to avoid turning their planet into a literal hellscape. So the United Nations establishes an agency with the goal of protecting future generations at all costs, the Ministry for the Future. They start out by asking countries to meet certain goals for reducing emissions, but some countries do it and other countries don't because, they like money and they're run by the fossil fuel industry. So everyone continues to suffer. But at some point, some of the people in charge realize that they need to think outside of the box and use a variety of tools to combat not just climate change, but capitalism itself. There are geoengineering projects. There's the introduction of a carbon coin based on the real-life global carbon reward concept. There's trickery that pushes banks to crack down on dark money. There's global action to grind economies to a halt. And there's terrorism. Yeah, escalating terrorism targeted at private jet owners and other wealthy fossil fuel advocates, as government agencies, for the most part, turn a blind eye. I'll leave it to you to read the book and decide if, within the universe presented in the book, these tactics are plausible, effective, or moral. I'll also leave it to you to decide how these tactics might apply in a situation where the stakes are so high and a people's institutions fail them so purposely and so directly. Maybe destroying capitalism is the way to go.